Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 13. For I do not want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, that our forefathers were all under the cloud. They all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, God was not pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered all over the desert. Now these things occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in pagan revelry. We should not commit sexual immorality, as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 of them died. We should not test the Lord, as some of them did and were killed by snakes. And do not grumble, as some of them did and were killed by this destroying angel. These things happened to them as examples, and written down as warnings for us, on whom the fulfillment of the ages has come. So, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you do not fall. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. As far as the reading of God's holy and inspired word. The zookeeper wrote in his newsletter that something happens to raccoons. About 2 years old, they go through a hormonal change, and they go from these cute, cuddly little creatures to evil people. And he noticed his friend had a cute little raccoon. He was about 18, 19 months old, and said to her, you know what's going to happen here in a few months. He's going to go through a change, and it could become dangerous. And if you consider that a 30-pound raccoon is equal to a 100-pound raccoon, or a 100-pound dog in a fight, it can be kind of dangerous. And this woman said, no, Bandit would never hurt me. Bandit would never hurt me. A few months later, she was undergoing reconstructive surgery because her cute, cuddly pet raccoon had indeed attacked her. He was released into the wild. Sometimes we think we can handle it. It's not going to bother us. Like the gentleman who had adopted the pet rattlesnake. This guy wasn't really bright. But then again, he lived in Oregon, so like, what are we saying? But anyway, he thought it was kind of cute. He had this little mini rattlesnake, about 2 foot long. Picked him up while he was on the desert. Thought it'd be a nice thing to bring home and he would show his friends. Look at my pet rattlesnake. He loves me. I love him. I kissed him. And he went to do it again. The rattlesnake decided he didn't like that. Bit him on the upper lip. He immediately passed out. Became paralyzed, and they life-flighted into a Portland hospital where he survived. The rattlesnake did not. Sometimes we think we can mess around with things and get away with it. Now, I don't see too many pet raccoons, and most of us are smart enough not to try to kiss a rattlesnake. But what other temptations are we messing with? What other things do we think we're safe with? We've got it under control. We can't be bothered. We can't get caught here. Because the problem is, when we think we're safe, we're in the greatest danger. Because there's no security in ceremony. There's no security in the things that we have done or where we've been with Christ. The only security we have is in an ongoing love relationship with Jesus Christ. That day by day, moment by moment, ask the question, God, where do you want me to be and how do you want me to live? So Paul says, let's take a little trip down memory lane, shall we? Let me give you a little history lesson. Because his point is that participation does not equal privilege. Because Israel had seen, during the Exodus, the most incredible series of miraculous events that any event in the history of Israel had ever been part of. From the plagues, to the deliverance from Egypt, to the crossing through the Red Sea, to the manna, to the water that was provided for them miraculously. I mean, it was miracle after miracle after miracle. God was going on and on and on. And so he uses the language, they were all baptized into Moses. And one man writes the word baptized, of course, is highly significant. To be baptized into Moses means they were voluntarily and unconditionally placing themselves into the leadership of Moses. And Paul's striking but unusual language in this passage emphasizes the parallels between the privileges of God's people under Moses and the privilege of God's people under Jesus. So they had all the privileges in Moses. They've been baptized in Moses, just as the current recipients of this letter have been baptized into Christ. They had the same power, the same direction. Not only that, but they had spiritual food and drink. Now, that doesn't say that manna was just strictly a spiritual image. It was real food. The water was real water, but it was miraculously provided. And so what Paul is drawing the parallel here to is we have our own spiritual food. We have the Lord's Supper. It's given to us. We drink and we eat. And so he's emphasizing the similarities and parallels. And then he says, however, God wasn't pleased with most of them. Their bodies were scattered over the desert. Now, if you know your Old Testament history, that's about as understated as you can get. Because God was, yeah, that's true, he was not pleased with most of them. The reality is only two who had a fighting age who survived the Exodus actually entered the Promised Land, and that was Joshua and Caleb. Not even Moses himself got in. So by saying God wasn't pleased with most of them, Paul is saying, look, God wiped them out, scattered their bodies across the wilderness, and this wasn't natural death. They faced the problems, the issues of God's judgment. And he's pointing out the fact that even though they participated in all these sacramental moments with God, even though they've been walking with God through the wilderness, they still managed to sin and fall short of what God meant for them. And the problem with Israel is they focused on evil things. They didn't focus on God's goodness. They're out in the wilderness. They've got nothing else to depend on. And instead of seeing God's grace and goodness, they're going, well, wouldn't it be better if we hadn't left Egypt? Forgetting the fact that they were slaves, they were beaten, starved. Not only that, they got sucked into idolatry. And one man puts, alternatively, the eating and drinking could refer not to their consumption of God-given food and drink, but to their feasting in the presence of the idol. And so they're talking about idol feasts leading to other immoral behavior. Because in that day, idolatry and sexual immorality went hand in hand. They had temple prostitutes. Okay? So when you went to the temple, worship at the temple, or have an idol feast, they had a sacrifice, they have a feast afterwards, it tended to get carried beyond them. And so what he's saying, in essence, is don't test God. And saying, you're not content with Christ at this point. So what is God really getting to with us? What's God's interest in our lives today? First of all, God is interested in us, not just ritual. So often in churches and in religious practice, we get focused on the ritual. You have to be here for this. You have to participate in that. You need to do this. And as long as we've done A, B, C, or D, we feel like we've got the basis covered. And God's going to be pleased with us. And He's going to give us what we want. I like this comment. Some Christians believe that their participation in the Christian sacraments guaranteed them against any possible loss of future salvation. Paul admits no sacramentalism, though the notion can be found in paganism. For him, there was no escape from the perpetually renewed decision of faith and obedience. You see, we can't just say, I was baptized, I took communion, I made confession of faith.
As long as those events are all in the past, they don't give us anything more than just a history lesson. We have to be following Christ day by day by day. So what does this mean? What are we looking at? Well, let's look back to history. When Paul says, don't lust after evil things, he's saying, learn to desire what is really good for you. Learn to desire.
What's fascinating, Deb works in food service, school food service. And if you've got kids in the elementary school system, you know that we've been systematically starving your children. From an idea and a concept, we're trying to teach children something we've never been able to teach adults, which is how to eat healthy. We're trying to teach them to desire the good things. And somewhere along the line, we've got the idea that as long as the government mandates it, it's going to be all right. Well, I'm going to get off my soapbox. But if we desire the good things that God wants to give us, we won't be grumbling about the other things around us. He says, don't become idolaters, could best be translated, don't let anything replace God in your affection. You see, it's easy to let other things creep in. Well, I didn't have time for God this morning because I had to. I didn't take time for God today because, and things began to get in the way of God. Let's not commit fornication as a positive call to put all of our sexuality in the context of love and commitment, taking all of ourselves and putting it under God. Let's not try the Lord. Calls the time when the Israelites grew impatient with God's provision. It's a call for us to trust Him with our lives and everything in us. So often we say, God, I want it now. And God said, will you willing to trust Him? Will you wait? And then, don't complain. It's a reference to the frequent murmurings of the Israelites. And it's a call for us to keep a positive and wholesome spirit. And this isn't, the positive thinking movement of the 70s, or if you just think everything's good, it's going to be. But it's a matter of taking a look and saying, what is possible? What is God doing around me? And where can I see it? And how can I keep that attitude focused? What about idolatry? We always go, wow, there are no idols today. Are there? Listen to this comment. In a secularized world, we are in danger of repeating the Corinthians error of supposing that there is really no danger of idolatry. If there really are no other gods, we tell ourselves we can participate casually in whatever customs our culture may deem normal and sensible. 1 Corinthians 10 raises a warning flag and summons us to scrutinize our small compromises with the cultural systems around us. When we find ourselves in the face of some dubious invitation or opportunity saying, no problem, I can handle it, I can be involved in this and still be a good Christian, we should pause and remember Paul's warnings to the strong at Corinth. There's two distinct dangers here. The idols have more power than we suppose to reshape us, and we are courting the judgment of God. So how do we do that? How do we stay connected to God? Well, go back to my children's sermon. Thanks for that. We don't just walk out and grab the implement and pull it by ourselves. We don't just go out and try to do the Christian life by ourselves. You can't live this life by yourself. You got to have power. We connect our implements to tractors. We hook our trailers up to vehicles because we need power to carry out the task that is assigned to us. We hook ourselves to the power of the Holy Spirit, to God's presence in our lives, day by day, hour by hour. And we do that by staying in community. Why do you think we offer Bible studies and prayer time? Because I need more things to do in my day? No. Because we need to stay connected. We need to stay focused on what God is calling us to do. And when we neglect the community, when we stop coming together to worship, and then, by the way, this is not a demand that you show up on Sunday morning. But it's an invitation to take a look
look at your life and say, where am I neglecting the fellowship? Where am I neglecting my responsibilities to cultivate my spiritual life? And all you've got to do is look back at the history of Israel. These are the folks who were led by a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day. God was right smack dab in front of them. All they had to do is walk out of their tent, and there was the pillar. God. And yet these people wandered away. Are we better? Heavens no. So that's where I like this verse. This verse has a lot of personal flavor for me. So if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. Gordon MacDonald was the pastor of one of the largest churches in New England when I was in seminary. Gordon was the early prototype of Bill Hybels. But in 1988, after he'd been president of InterVarsity, he fell from grace because he had an affair. But 6 years earlier, he was going to give a commencement address at a college and talking with one of the trustees. The man said to him, Gordon, if Satan were going to attack you, where would he go? What would he do? Oh, he says, probably lots of ways, but I know one place he'd never get me, that's in my personal relationship. Oh, what happened to him? What's Satan getting? Right in his personal relationships. Where he said, I'm invincible here, Satan said, you want to bet? Never forget this funeral. I don't remember the man's name because he wasn't a member of my congregation. But I do remember the fact that before the funeral I was visiting with the pallbearers, and one of them, a friend of mine, said, Ron, why don't you take the study? I said, Richard, I said, I've done lots of these. I can do it. You know what happened? 10 minutes later, I was feeling about that high because I mispronounced the name of the son of that gentleman who passed away. And I won't tell you about the wedding where I forgot the bride's name at the end of the sermon. Her name was Danny, by the way. His name is Jim. That was, 30 years now. Because I thought, I'm good, I've got it, I can do this, I'm a pastor. Oh, heavens. The minute you think you've got it all together, you're going to fall flat on your face. The minute you think you're standing firm, everything's good, you're in good shape, you're going to take a nosedive off this platform. Guaranteed. Okay? Because we have to be careful of overconfidence. And so when we face temptation, Paul's warning that there's lots of testings coming. And these testings come because of the weakness of their spiritual resources. But the major point about temptation and testing is not the force of sin's attractiveness, but the make or break nature of the trial. His question to us, are we going to come through with tougher resilience and a stronger faith in the living God? Or will your determination to endure end? That's the question when we face temptation. But you also notice, he says, be careful that you don't fall. But then he adds, no temptation has seized you except is common to everybody. Rod Bill has an unauthorized translation, by the way. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted with what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. So he's saying, be careful. When you think you're standing strong, you're going to fall. But, however, keep in mind, there is nothing that's going to come across your path that hasn't been put in someone's path before. And God is going to provide the power to get you out. God is going to provide the escape. And the word escape is the same word as Exodus. It's the same word Luke uses to describe the redemptive death of Jesus on the cross. God provides us with an exodus. He's not waiting, I like this word, He's not waiting to get presumptuous with punishment. You ever think about that? God's not just waiting. He says, just a little one, bang, He smacked you. He's not waiting to knock us upon and say, man, would you learn once? He says He's trying to help us. And it is the certain consummation of an exodus that's already been achieved that enables us to endure. And we will see the light at the end of the tunnel when we press on. Because the exodus has always been given to us in Jesus Christ, whose death on the cross. We have a way out. We have a way to claim that. So God provides us a solution. And we need to say, what am I vulnerable? Where am I vulnerable? Another way to put it, what are my signature sins? What are the things that continually, perpetually trip me up? Where do I get caught? What do I need to avoid? And then live moment by moment, depending on God and God alone. Because the reality is, nobody is exempt. There's no one who gets an exempt buck. Can't get that badge. It's not available. We're all tempted. So how do we develop a battle plan? First of all, wrong desires and temptations happen to everybody. So don't feel that you've been singled out. Accept it, deal with it, ask God to help you move past it. Others have resisted it, so can you. Any temptation can be resisted. God will help. But then you've got to recognize people and situations that create problems for you. And then run, don't walk, from anything you know is wrong. If you're with a group of people who you know is going to lead you in the wrong direction, get out of there. And this just isn't for teenagers. It happens to all of us. When we're in that group, get out of it. Pray for help, because God's there. And running is probably the first step. Let's be battle plan. It's simple. But keep in mind, God's always at work. God doesn't take weekends off. God is always here for you. He's provided the means of escape. And security is found in moment by moment dependence on God. Not in ceremony or ritual. It's found in a life to live with God. One last thought. A gentleman says when he was a child, a bully moved into the neighborhood. About 4 years older than I was, and he was a bit bigger than I was. I escaped for a while, and one day I was out in my front yard. He decided it was my turn to be picked on. He comes into the yard and starts to pick on me. I thought, I'll just stand up. So as I stood up and kind of stood, he said, I noticed he started to tremble, and he started to shake, he started to back away. I went, whoa, I'm pretty good. Then I heard a noise. Turned around. There's my dad on the porch. Well, he wasn't afraid of me, but he sure